Genesis 6 verse 4. 6 words in Hebrew that have generated more debate than almost any other passage in the entire Bible. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. It seems simple, but when you start digging into the real meaning of these words, who these creatures were, where they came from, why they existed, and what they did that made God decide to exterminate all life on the face of the planet, the answer is so disturbing that most churches simply avoid the subject. And I understand why. Because if the biblical text is describing what it seems to be describing, then before the flood there existed on earth a race of beings that was not entirely human. Beings born from a union that should never have happened. Beings so large, so violent, and so powerful that creation itself had to be restarted from scratch to eliminate them. But here is the question that almost no one asks. If God sent the flood to destroy the Nephilim, why do they appear again after the flood? Let's start at the only possible place. The original text, Genesis 6 verses 1 to 4, describes a scene that looks nothing like what you learned in Sunday school. The text says that when men began to multiply on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that these daughters were beautiful and took for themselves all whom they chose. Pay attention to this detail. The text does not say they asked. It does not say there was consensual marriage. It says they took. The Hebrew word is lakach, to take, seize, capture. It is the same word used to describe armies taking spoils of war. And the result of this union, according to the biblical text itself, were the Nephilim, described as the mighty men, the men of renown who were of old. Now, before continuing, I need to tell you about the debate that has divided theologians for over 2,000 years, because everything depends on a single question: who are the sons of God in this text? There are 3 main interpretations. The first and oldest says that the sons of God were angels, celestial beings who abandoned their position in heaven and descended to earth to unite with human women. The second says they were descendants of Seth, Adam's 3rd son, a godly lineage that mixed with the corrupted lineage of Cain. And the third, less popular, says they were ancient kings or rulers who proclaimed themselves divine. Each of these interpretations completely changes the meaning of the Nephilim, but when you analyze the original Hebrew, one of them stands out so clearly that the others practically crumble. The expression sons of God in Hebrew is Bene Ha-Elohim, and this expression appears in other places in the Bible, and in all of them, without exception, it refers to celestial beings. Job 1-6. One day the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Job 38:7. When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. In none of these cases is the text talking about humans. None. The expression Bene Ha-Elohim in the Hebrew Old Testament is a technical term for members of the Celestial Council. Beings created directly by God, not born of man and woman. When the Bible wants to speak of humans, it uses Beni Adam, sons of Adam. The distinction is intentional, and if that still hasn't convinced you, the New Testament confirms this reading in a brutal way. Jude, verse 6, "And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day." Peter reinforces this in 2 Peter 2:4. God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them into Tartarus, delivering them into chains of darkness. Tartarus. This word appears only once in the entire Bible. It is not Sheol. It is not the common Hades. It's a term borrowed from Greek mythology to describe the deepest level of the underworld, a prison reserved for beings who committed a transgression so grave that even conventional hell was not sufficient punishment. And what did these angels do to deserve this? According to Jude, verse 7, they were like Sodom and Gomorrah, which gave themselves over to immorality and went after strange flesh. strange flesh, flesh that was not of their same nature. Celestial beings crossing the barrier between dimensions to unite with women of flesh and bone. If you believe the Bible is the Word of God, then comment now, the Bible is true. Because what we just read is not a liberal interpretation, it's not some crazy internet theory. It is the biblical text read in the original Hebrew, confirmed by the Greek of the New Testament. Now comes the part that few people know, because there was an entire book dedicated to telling this story, with details that Genesis summarized in 4 verses, the Book of Enoch. It is not part of the Protestant canon, but it was widely read and respected by Second Temple Jews, by the early Christians, and an important detail. It is quoted directly by Jude in the New Testament. Jude quotes Enoch by name and reproduces a prophecy from the book. If the biblical author considered Enoch worthy of canonical citation, it is worth hearing what it says. And what Enoch says is terrifying. According to the Book of Enoch, chapters 6 to 16, a group of 200 angels called Watchers made a pact on Mount Hermon. Hermon. Remember that name because it will appear again. These 200 angels were led by a being named Shemihaza, and together they swore an oath. They would descend to earth, take human wives, and teach humanity knowledge that was not meant for them to know. Each watcher had a specialty. Azazel taught the making of weapons of war, swords, knives, shields, and also cosmetics and jewelry. Others taught enchantments, astrology, the cutting of medicinal roots and celestial signs. Think about what this means. According to this tradition, the sudden technological advancement of pre-flood humanity was not natural. It was injected. Beings with supernatural knowledge poured centuries of development into a species that was not ready to receive it. It's like handing a nuclear bomb to a child. And the children of these unions, the Nephilim, were the physical result of this cosmic violation. Enoch describes them as giants who devoured everything humanity produced. When the food ran out, they began to devour the humans themselves. And when humans were not enough, they turned against each other and drank blood. The text is visceral. It is not a metaphor. It describes an earth being consumed from the inside out by creatures that should not exist. Half celestial, half earthly, with no place in either world. Too big for the world of men, too corrupted for the world of angels, trapped in an existence of insatiable hunger and unrestrained violence. But how big were they? This is where things get really interesting. The text of Genesis does not give a specific measurement. It calls them Gibborim, mighty, valiant, and Anshe Hashem, men of fame, of renown. But when you cross-reference this with other biblical texts that mention descendants or remnants of the Nephilim, the numbers start to appear, and they are absurd. Deuteronomy describes the bed of Og, king of Bashan, the last of the Rephaim, one of the tribes associated with the post-flood Nephilim. His bed was 9 cubits long by 4 cubits wide. A Hebrew cubit measures approximately 18 inches. Do the math. Og's bed was 13.5 feet long and almost 6 feet wide. No one makes a bed 30% larger than their body. If the bed was 13.5 feet, Og was at least 10 feet tall. For comparison, the tallest basketball player in NBA history, Gheorghe Mureșan, was 7'7" and could barely move without joint pain. Og would be nearly 3 feet taller. And Og wasn't even the most famous. Goliath of Gath, the giant who faced David, is described in 1 Samuel 17:4 as being 6 cubits in a span, somewhere around 9 to 6. His armor weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze, about 125 pounds for the breastplate alone. The tip of his spear weighed 600 shekels of iron, nearly 15 pounds. Imagine a spear with a 15-pound tip being thrown by a man nearly 10 feet tall. No Israelite soldier wanted to go near him. The text says that all Israel was terrified, and Goliath was not alone. 2 Samuel 21 lists 4 more giants from Gath, all of the same lineage, all killed in battle by David's warriors. One of them had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 digits in total. The text makes a point of recording this detail because it was not normal. It was a genetic marker of something different. If this level of biblical detail impressed you, leave a like now so this video can reach more people who need to know this story. Now I need to return to a question I raised at the beginning that has been bothering you ever since. If the purpose of the flood was to eliminate the Nephilim, and the text of Genesis makes this quite clear when it says that all flesh had corrupted its way on the earth, then how is it possible that Numbers says Moses' spies saw Nephilim in the land of Canaan hundreds of years after the flood? Shouldn't the flood have solved the problem for good? This is perhaps the most difficult question in this entire story, and there are 2 possible explanations, both disturbing in their own way. The first, it happened again. If angels fell once, nothing in the biblical text prevents others from falling later. The Pact of Mount Hermon involved 200 specific watchers who were imprisoned in Tartarus. But the Bible speaks of legions of angels, thousands, tens of thousands. If the plan was to corrupt the human lineage, to prevent the Messiah from being born of a woman, the failure of the first 200 does not mean others wouldn't try. The second explanation is genetic. It is possible that the DNA of the Nephilim survived the flood through the wives of Noah's sons. Genesis 6:9 makes a point of saying that Noah was perfect in his generations. The Hebrew word is tamim, which means without defect, upright, complete. Some scholars argue that this perfection was not just moral, but genetic, that Noah's lineage was the only one that had not been contaminated by interbreeding with the Watchers. But the text does not say the same about his daughters-in-law. What if one of them carried recessive Nephilim genes? The contamination would have crossed the flood inside the ark itself. Think about the weight of that. The ark, the instrument of salvation, may have carried within it the exact seed of what God sought to destroy. It's like a virus that survives quarantine, hidden in the body of one of the survivors. And when the right conditions presented themselves generations later, the genes manifested again in the clans of Anak, the Rephaim, the Emim, the Zamzumim, all giant peoples who appear scattered throughout Canaan when the Israelites arrived. Numbers is brutally honest about what the spies saw. We saw the giants there, the descendants of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. We were like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so we were in their eyes. Grasshoppers. This is not a description of men slightly taller than average. It is a description of beings on such a different scale that the Israelites felt like insects. And 10 of the 12 spies returned so terrified that they convinced the entire nation to rebel against God instead of entering the Promised Land. That decision cost them 40 years in the desert, 40 years of delay because the fear of the Nephilim was greater than faith in the promise. And here enters a pattern that almost no one notices. Look at the map of where these giants lived. The Rephaim dominated Bashan in the northeast. The sons of Anak were in Hebron in the south. The Emim inhabited the region of Moab, east of the Dead Sea. The Zamzumim controlled the land of Ammon. If you trace these locations on the map, they form an almost perfect siege around the land that God had promised to Abraham. Coincidence or strategic positioning? Because if the goal was to prevent Israel from taking possession of the land of the promise, the land from which the lineage of the Messiah would come, then placing giants at all the entry routes is a brilliant military strategy. Not human, but brilliant. And that is exactly why the conquest of Canaan under Joshua gains a totally new dimension when you understand the context of the Nephilim. Each battle against these giant clans was not just a territorial war, it was a spiritual cleanup operation. Joshua records that he exterminated the Anakim from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, from the entire mountain country of Judah and the entire mountain country of Israel. The text says he utterly destroyed them with their cities. And in verse 22 comes the crucial detail. None of the Anakim were left in the land of the children of Israel. They remained only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod. Gath. Remember that name? That is where Goliath came from, generations later. The remnants that Joshua could not eliminate concentrated in the Philistine cities, and centuries later one of them, nearly 10 feet tall, with 125 pounds of armor, stood before an entire army of Israel and defied God. The confrontation between David and Goliath is not a little story of childhood courage. It is the final chapter of a war that began before the flood. But what I haven't told you yet, and what completely changes how you see these creatures, is what happened to the Nephilim after they died. Because beings that were half celestial and half human did not have a post-death destination like ours. Their bodies were mortal, but their spirits had no place in either heaven or the Sheol of humans. According to the book of Enoch, chapter 15, God pronounced a specific sentence upon them. Evil spirits shall proceed from their bodies, because they were born from humans, but had their origin from the holy watchers. They shall be evil spirits upon the earth, and evil spirits shall they be called. The spirits of the giants shall afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, and cause anguish upon the earth. Did you hear that? According to this tradition, which was widely accepted in Second Temple Judaism and in the early centuries of Christianity, the spirits of the dead Nephilim did not rest. They became the demons that wander the earth, not fallen angels. Those are trapped in Tartarus. But their children, without bodies and without a destination, condemned to wander between worlds until the day of judgment. If you believe this changes everything you thought about the spiritual world, comment now, I didn't know. And if this connection between Nephilim and demons seems too radical, consider this. When Jesus cast out unclean spirits in the Gospels, these demonic beings demonstrated a very specific pattern. They recognized Jesus immediately. They knew who he was before any human knew. They begged not to be sent to the abyss, the same prison of Tartarus where the watchers were. And when cast out of a body, they desperately sought another body to inhabit. In Mark 5, the legion of demons begs to be sent into the pigs instead of being without a body. Beings that were born in physical bodies, half human, half celestial, desperate to have flesh again. This is consistent with spirits that once had physical form and were condemned to exist without it. The implication is overwhelming. It means that the story of the Nephilim did not stay trapped in the Old Testament. It crossed the flood, traversed the conquest of Canaan, survived in the Philistine cities, echoed in David's battle against Goliath, and continued in Jesus' ministry when he confronted the spirits of these same beings, now without bodies, but still present, still hungry, still violent, a continuous line from Genesis 6 to the Gospels. But here is the detail that few connect, and that transforms this story from something ancient into something urgently current. Jesus was in Caesarea Philippi, Matthew 16, a place that most Christians ignore completely when they read this passage, but the location is not accidental. Caesarea Philippi was at the base of Mount Hermon, the exact place where, according to the book of Enoch, the 200 watchers descended and made their pact. In Jesus' time, this site was considered so spiritually contaminated that Jews avoided the region. Pagans had built a massive sanctuary there dedicated to Pan, the god half man and half goat, around a cave so deep that the ancients believed it had no bottom. They called that cave the Gate of Hades. Literally, it wasn't a metaphor, it was the name of the place. And it was there, with the mouth of the abyss at his back and the mountain of the watchers over his head, that Jesus chose to make the most aggressive declaration of his entire ministry. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Read that again with the context you now have. Jesus was not making an abstract theological statement in a comfortable synagogue. He took his disciples to the epicenter of the angelic rebellion, the place where it all began, where the Watchers descended, where the door to the world of the dead supposedly stood, and he declared war. There, on that ground, looking at that cave, it is like a general who marches to the gate of the enemy fortress and says, "This door will not hold." The disciples understood the message. It is we who have lost the context. And it wasn't the only time Jesus directly confronted the legacy of the Nephilim in that region. Mount Hermon is part of the mountain range that forms the boundaries of Bashan, the ancient kingdom of Og, the last of the Rephaim. The same land that Moses conquered before he died, described in Deuteronomy as the land of the Rephaim. When Jesus ascended a high mountain for the Transfiguration, where Moses and Elijah appeared at his side and the voice of God thundered from heaven, the oldest tradition identifies this mountain as Hermon itself. If this is correct, Jesus chose the mountain of rebellion to demonstrate the glory of God. He chose the place of the fall to proclaim restoration. Every step he took in that region was an act of spiritual reconquest. But I need to show you something that goes beyond the biblical text and enters the realm of archaeology. Because if giants really inhabited that region, there should be physical evidence. And there is. In the region of Bashan, modern-day Golan, between Israel and Syria, there are more than 8,000 megalithic structures called dolmens. They are massive stone constructions, some weighing dozens of tons, erected more than 4,000 years ago, and no one knows for sure how they were built. The basalt blocks used weigh between 20 and 50 tons each. There were no cranes, there were no pulleys on that scale. Conventional theories speak of earthen ramps and hundreds of workers, but the sheer quantity of structures, over 8,000 concentrated in a single region, defies any explanation based on common human labor. And they are all exactly in the land the Bible identifies as the territory of the Rephaim. There's more. In Rujm el-Hiri, in the Golan, there is a structure that archaeologists call Gilgal Rephaim, the Circle of the Giants. It consists of 5 concentric stone rings with a central tomb, covering an area larger than Stonehenge. The entire structure weighs more than 40,000 tons. 40,000 tons of basalt piled in a precise geometric pattern, aligned with astronomical events, the solstices and equinoxes. Who built this? Official archaeology says an unknown Chalcolithic civilization. Unknown, no name, no records, just impossible stones in the exact place where the Bible says giants lived. And the local name, Gilgal Rephaim, did not come from archaeologists. It came from the oral tradition of the peoples who inhabited that land for millennia. They always knew whose stones those were. And this is the part that fascinates me, because it's not just the Bible that speaks of giants born from the union of gods and humans. Practically every ancient civilization on the planet has this memory. The Sumerians described the Anunnaki, divine beings who descended to Earth and whose children with human women were the heroes of old. The Greeks called them titans and demigods, Hercules, Achilles, Perseus, all born of a god with a mortal. The Hindus had the Rakshasas, giants of superhuman strength, born of celestial beings. The Norse spoke of the Jotuns, giants who existed before men and warred against the gods. The Mayans described Zipacna and Cabracan, giants who moved mountains. Native Americans from various tribes, Paiute, Delaware, Choctaw, had oral traditions about a race of red-haired giants that inhabited the land before them and were eventually destroyed. Cultures separated by oceans, mountains, and thousands of years of history, telling essentially the same thing. Beings from the sky united with women of the earth. Giants were born. These giants were violent, and they were destroyed. The pattern is so universal that the simplest explanation is that they are all remembering, each in their own way, the same event. Genesis 6 is the Hebrew version, Hesiod's Theogony is the Greek version, the Enuma Elish is the Babylonian version, but the event behind all these versions is the same. If all this is giving you a new perspective on what the Bible really says, subscribe to the channel now, because in the next few minutes I'm going to enter the most controversial part of this story, and most channels don't have the courage to touch this subject. Let's talk about DNA. Because in the last 20 years, genetics has made discoveries that no one expected. In 2010, the Neanderthal Genome Project revealed that between 1% and 4% of the DNA of every non-African human comes from Neanderthals, a species that was supposedly separate from Homo sapiens. In 2010, the Denisovan hominin was also identified from a single bone fragment found in a cave in Siberia. Denisovans had a distinct genome, and modern populations in Melanesia and Southeast Asia carry up to 6% Denisovan DNA. And in 2013, the DNA analysis of a 400,000-year-old femur found in Cima de los Huesos, Spain, revealed a genetic mix so complex that scientists admitted the human family tree is more of a web than a tree. Now, I'm not saying Neanderthals were Nephilim, that would be dishonest to the text and to science, but I'm saying that modern science has confirmed something the Bible stated millennia ago. There was hybridization, species that science considered separate interbred and produced fertile offspring. The genetic barrier between different types of beings was more porous than anyone imagined. If this is true on a natural level, between hominins of different species, the biblical claim that hybridization occurred on a supernatural level is not as absurd as it seemed 50 years ago. The mechanism is different, the scale is different, but the principle that the barrier between categories of beings can be crossed with unpredictable results is no longer science fiction. It is a fact published in peer-reviewed papers. And there is a genetic detail that is rarely mentioned in this discussion: polydactyly. Remember the giants of Gath with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 on each foot? Polydactyly is a real genetic condition caused by mutations in specific genes, the HOX genes and the SHH, sonic hedgehog, gene. It is hereditary, and in certain populations it appears with much higher frequency than the global average. The point is not that every case of polydactyly is evidence of Nephilim blood, but the fact that the Bible records this as a marker of the giants of Gath, and modern genetics confirms it is a hereditary mutation that concentrates in specific lineages, is at the very least worthy of attention. The biblical author knew nothing about HOX genes, but he knew that anomaly was familial, not random. It passed from father to son, and it marked a lineage. There is yet another layer to this story that is almost never discussed, and it connects everything we've seen so far with a strategic dimension that goes beyond violence and genetics. Because the Watchers didn't just descend to take women, they taught. And what they taught was, according to the text of Enoch, as dangerous as the hybridization itself. Enoch, chapter 8, lists the knowledge transmitted. Azazel taught humanity to manufacture swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He taught them to work metals and make jewelry. He taught facial painting and the beautification of the eyes with antimony. Another watcher, Semjaza, taught enchantments and the cutting of roots, pharmacology, and spiritual manipulation. Armaros taught how to undo enchantments. Barakijal taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the knowledge of the constellations. Sariel taught the cycles of the moon. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds. Each watcher was a specialized teacher in an area that would permanently alter the trajectory of human civilization. And the result was not progress. It was catastrophe. Enoch 8:2 says that after these teachings there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray and became corrupt in all their ways. Weapons generated wars on a scale never seen before. Cosmetics and jewelry were not harmless vanity. In the context of the ancient world, they were instruments of seduction linked to fertility cults and ritual prostitution. The knowledge of roots and enchantments opened doors to spiritual manipulation and poisoning. Astrology replaced the direct relationship with the Creator with a system of divination that placed destiny in the stars instead of in God's hands. Each teaching was a way to cut a thread between humanity and its Creator. Each piece of knowledge was a small declaration of cosmic independence. Together, they rebuilt pre-flood civilization on a foundation that was not of God, and the result was a world so corrupt that the only solution was total destruction. And here is the pattern that should bother us, because Genesis 11, just a few chapters after the flood, describes humanity doing the exact same thing again. The Tower of Babel. Let us build ourselves a tower that reaches to the heavens and make a name for ourselves. Make a name, in Hebrew, Nahaseh Lanu Shem. And how did the text describe the Nephilim? Anshe Hashem, men of name, men of renown, the same ambition, the same language. Post-flood humanity, without the direct influence of the Watchers, reproducing the same impulse, to reach heaven by their own means, to become like divine beings, to break the barrier between the human and the celestial. The tower was not a skyscraper, it was a ziggurat, a religious structure designed as a portal between heaven and earth. Humanity was trying to reopen the door that God had closed with the flood. And where was the Tower of Babel built? In the plain of Shinar, Mesopotamia, the same region where Sumerian civilization exploded seemingly out of nowhere with cuneiform writing, advanced astronomy, base 60 mathematics that we still use today to measure minutes and seconds, irrigation systems, law codes, and a cosmology that described divine beings descending from heaven to civilize humanity. The Sumerians themselves said their civilization was not their own creation. They said everything was taught by the Apkallu, 7 sages sent by the gods before the Great Flood. Beings that came from heaven brought supernatural knowledge and transformed primitive tribes into an advanced civilization. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's the same story as Enoch, told by another culture, in another language, in the same geographical location. What we are seeing here is not isolated mythology. It is convergent memory, multiple civilizations in the same region, remembering the same events, using different names for the same beings. The Watchers of Enoch, the Anunnaki of the Sumerians, the sons of God of Genesis, the Apkallu of Mesopotamian traditions, all point to the same phenomenon. Non-human beings interfered directly in human history before the flood, and the effects of that interference were never fully erased. But there is a question that most people are afraid to ask, because it touches the limit between theology, science, and something that modern culture has classified as fiction, and classified as such too quickly. If celestial beings interfered in human genetics before the flood, and if at least part of that interference survived the flood through genes or through new incursions, then to what extent was the human lineage affected? How far does this contamination go? And, more disturbingly, is it over? Daniel chapter 2, verse 43. Nebuchadnezzar dreamed of a statue representing the great empires of history, the head of gold, Babylon, the chest of silver, Medo-Persia, the belly of bronze, Greece, the legs of iron, Rome. But the feet, the final part, the last empire, were of iron mixed with clay. And Daniel explains the meaning of the feet with a phrase that should make any student of the Bible stop and reread. They will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another. They will mingle with the seed of men. Who is the hidden subject of this sentence? Who is it that will mingle with the seed of men? If they are already humans, the sentence makes no sense. You don't say that humans will mingle with the seed of men. That would be redundant. The sentence only has meaning if the subject is something that is not human, something that will try to merge with humanity again but will not succeed. They will not adhere to one another, just as iron and clay do not truly mix. I'm not going to tell you what this prophecy means with absolute certainty. Theologians have debated this for centuries, and I don't have the arrogance to end the discussion in a YouTube video. But I will tell you what the biblical pattern shows consistently from Genesis to Daniel. The attempt to cross the barrier between the celestial and the human was not an isolated event in the past. It was a continuous strategy. It happened before the flood with the Watchers. It reappeared after the flood in the giant clans of Canaan. And according to Daniel, it will happen again in the last days. The same strategy, the same mixture, the same failure to create a true union. Iron and clay side by side, but never fused. And if this whole story is making you rethink things you thought you knew, wait, because I still haven't told you about the strangest place where the Nephilim appear in the Bible. A place that has nothing to do with Genesis, nor with the conquest of Canaan, nor with Goliath. A place that connects the giants of the past with the most mysterious book in all of Scripture. Revelation. The book that closes the Bible with visions so intense that generations of readers don't know if they should interpret them literally, symbolically, or both at the same time. And it is exactly in this book that the echoes of the Nephilim resonate most strongly, if you know where to listen. Revelation chapter 9. John describes a vision. The fifth angel sounds his trumpet, and a star falls from heaven to earth. To this star is given the key to the bottomless pit, and when the abyss is opened, smoke rises from it like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air are darkened. And out of the smoke come creatures. The Greek text calls them akrides, the word normally translated as locusts. But the description John gives looks like no locust that exists or has ever existed. They had faces like human faces, hair like women's hair, teeth like lions' teeth, breastplates like breastplates of iron, tails like scorpions with stings, and over them reigned a king, the angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon and in Greek Apollyon, the destroyer. Now think about what we just read. Hybrid creatures, part human, part animal, part something that has no category, coming out of an abyss that was opened with a key, an abyss that was locked, sealed. Something was trapped inside. And when the lid is removed, what comes out is not human, not animal, not angel. It is a mixture, exactly as the Nephilim were a mixture. And who rules these creatures? An angel of the abyss, a celestial being associated with destruction, reigning over hybrid beings that emerge from an underground prison. If this reminds you of the story of the imprisoned Watchers who fathered monstrous children, it is because the narrative structure is identical. The Bible is using in the last book the same conceptual vocabulary as the first. And here is where Enoch fills a gap that the canonical text leaves open. Because the book of Enoch does not just describe the imprisonment of the Watchers, it describes what happened to the spirits of the Nephilim after their bodies died. Enoch chapter 15, verses 8 to 12. God speaks directly about the dead giants. The spirits of the giants shall oppress, corrupt, fall, content, and work destruction on the earth. These spirits shall not eat, but shall be hungry and thirsty. And these spirits shall rise up against the children of men, and against the women, because they have proceeded from them. The Nephilim died in the flood. Their bodies were destroyed. But according to Enoch, their spirits, which were neither fully human nor fully angelic, remained trapped between two worlds, without bodies, but with hunger, without rest, but without a destination, wandering the earth, tormenting the living. If that sounds like the description of demons in the New Testament, it is no coincidence. Think about how demons behave in the Gospels. What do they want? Bodies. Always bodies. When Jesus casts out the legion from the Gadarene man, the demons beg not to be sent into the abyss. They ask to enter the pigs. Any body will do, any host, because they are disembodied spirits that once had flesh and now do not. They were fathered in bodies that should not exist, bodies born from the violation of the barrier between the celestial and the human, and when those bodies were destroyed, they were left hungry forever. Enoch's theology perfectly explains the behavior of demons in the New Testament. They are the spirits of the Nephilim. They are not fallen angels. The fallen angels are the watchers, and they are bound in chains. The demons are something else. They are the children, the dead hybrids that can go neither to heaven nor to Sheol, because they do not belong entirely to either realm. And this is not just Enoch talking. The canonical books confirm the imprisonment of the rebellious angels with a specificity that should draw attention. Jude verse 6, "And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day." 2 Peter 2:4, "God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them into Tartarus, delivering them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment." Tartarus. Peter used this word only once in the entire New Testament. He did not use Hades. He did not use Gehenna. He used Tartarus, the specific term from Greek mythology for the underground prison where the Titans were chained after losing the war against the Olympian gods. Peter, a Jewish fisherman from Galilee, chose the Greek word most loaded with mythological meaning to describe where the fallen angels are imprisoned. This is no linguistic accident. It is a theological statement. Peter was saying to his Greek readers, "That story you know about the Titans, it's real, but you don't know the true names." And Jude goes even further, verse 14. "Now Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men also." Jude quotes Enoch directly, by name. He treats his prophecy as legitimate. And what did Enoch prophesy? That the Lord would come with thousands of his saints to judge all the ungodly. Judgment, not just of humans, of everything, of the watchers in their prisons, of the spirits of the Nephilim wandering the earth, of the entire system of corruption that began when 200 angels made a pact on top of a mountain and decided they wanted to be like men. The entire Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, is the story of a war. And that war did not start in Eden with a serpent and an apple. It started before. Genesis 3:15, the first prophecy of the Bible. God speaking to the serpent in the garden, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. The seed of the serpent against the seed of the woman, seed against seed, lineage against lineage." And from that verse on, the entire biblical narrative can be read as a war of lineages. The serpent, whatever it really was, receives the promise that it will have a seed, and that this seed will be in perpetual war with the seed of the woman. Now reread Genesis 6 with that in mind, the sons of God taking the daughters of men, corrupting the human lineage, producing a hybrid race. It is not a random episode of angelic lust. It is a strategic move in the war of seeds. If the seed of the woman, the lineage that would eventually produce the Messiah, could be contaminated, corrupted, diluted with non-human DNA, the prophecy of Genesis would be nullified. There would be no fully human descendant to crush the serpent's head. And that is exactly why the description of Noah in Genesis 6:9 uses such a specific word. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Perfect. In Hebrew, tamim. And tamim does not mean morally perfect. It is the same word used in Leviticus to describe animals without genetic defect fit for sacrifice, without blemish, without mixture, without contamination. Tamim in his generations, his genetic lineage was intact. Noah was not saved just because he was righteous. He was saved because his lineage had not been corrupted. He was fully human in a time when full humanity was becoming the exception, not the rule. The flood was not just a moral judgment against violence, it was a genetic rescue operation to preserve the pure seed, to keep the lineage open so that 42 generations later in Bethlehem, the prophecy of Genesis could be fulfilled. Follow the line, Noah survives with his lineage intact. From Noah comes Shem, from Shem comes Abraham, and God promises Abraham that from his seed will come a blessing for all nations. What does the enemy do? He fills Canaan, the land promised to Abraham, with giants, Rephaim, Anakim, Emim. The entire land that was supposed to receive Abraham's descendants is infested with corrupted lineages. When Moses sends the 12 spies, 10 return terrified. The land devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are men of great stature. We saw the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. The plan was clear. Block the land, make it uninhabitable for Abraham's seed, prevent the lineage from establishing itself, growing and eventually producing the promised descendant. Every giant in Canaan was a sentinel strategically placed to prevent the fulfillment of a prophecy, and that is why the commands of extermination in Deuteronomy and Joshua, those passages that so bother modern readers, gain a completely different meaning when seen in this light. God did not order the extermination of the Canaanites out of whim or cruelty. He ordered the clearing of specific lineages that were the direct result of non-human genetic contamination. The Hebrew is precise. The herem, the total destruction, is applied selectively. Not all cities receive the same treatment, only those associated with the clans of the Rephaim and their descendants. Joshua records, "At that time, Joshua came and cut off the Anakim from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them with their cities." And right after, verse 22, "None of the Anakim were left in the land of the children of Israel. They remained only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod." Gaza, Gath, Ashdod, the Philistine cities, exactly where generations later Goliath and his 4 brothers would come from, the last giants mentioned in the historical scriptures. The cleanup was almost complete. Almost. And these remnants continued trying to destroy the lineage of David, the messianic lineage. Goliath did not defy Israel by chance. He defied the lineage that carried the promise. And David, a teenager with a sling, the youngest of Jesse's sons, so insignificant that his own father forgot to present him to the prophet Samuel, David killed him with a stone in the forehead, and then he cut off the giant's head with his own sword, the seed of the woman crushing the head of the enemy. It is Genesis in miniature, played out in the valley of Elah, so that all Israel and all history could see. David's stone was not a stroke of luck. It was a prophetic act, a preview of what the ultimate seed would do millennia later. When another descendant of David, on another hill, would crush the serpent's head permanently, not with a sling, with a cross. And this is where everything converges. The story of the Nephilim is not a biblical curiosity. It is not a strange chapter you skip in your devotional reading. It is the key to understanding why the ancient world was so violent, why God ordered the flood, why the conquest of Canaan was so brutal, why biblical genealogies are so meticulous, why Jesus was born of a virgin, ensuring a human lineage without male intervention that could have been contaminated, and why the book of Revelation ends with a final judgment that spares no rebellious celestial power. Every piece fits. Every difficult passage of the Bible gains context. The violence makes sense. The genealogies make sense. The commands of extermination make sense. The incarnation makes sense. The war is not between God and humanity. It never was. It is between God and something that tried to destroy humanity by merging with it. When you close this Bible today and go back to your normal life, I want you to carry one thing with you. Everything you saw in this video, the Watchers, the Nephilim, the archaeology, the DNA, the prophecies, everything points to a single truth. Humanity was too valuable to be left alone. Something tried to corrupt it. Something tried to mingle with it and destroy it from the within. And God moved heaven and earth, literally, to prevent it. He drowned a planet. He guided a people through the desert for 40 years. He tore down the walls of entire cities. He raised up judges, kings, and prophets generation after generation. He sent his son to be born in a manger in an insignificant village on the periphery of the Roman Empire. Everything, every flood, every battle, every meticulous genealogy, every fulfilled prophecy, everything was to preserve one thing, the pure human seed, intact, without mixture, without contamination, without corruption. Because it was from that seed that the rescue would come. The Nephilim were impressive. They were giants, they were famous. The Hebrew text calls them Gibborim, mighty ones, men of renown. The ancient world admired them. They built cities, they dominated peoples. Their names were remembered for centuries, but they vanished, all of them. No lineage remained, no civilization remained, no permanent legacy remained. Meanwhile, Noah, a simple man, righteous, Tamim in his generations, no one special in the eyes of the ancient world, Noah survived. And from Noah came Shem, and from Shem came Abraham, and from Abraham came David, and from David came Jesus. The lineage of the simple, the pure, those who remained human when all the world around them was becoming something else. That lineage won. And I need you to understand what that means for your life. You live in a world that will tell you every day that you are not enough, that you need to be faster, more efficient, more connected, more optimized. That being human, with your limitations, your weaknesses, your mortality, is a problem to be solved. A beta version waiting for the ultimate upgrade. And the story of the Nephilim is the oldest and most brutal answer that exists to that lie. Because every time something tried to improve the human design, every time an entity crossed the border and tried to create something beyond the human, the result was destruction, violence, abomination, and God intervened, personally, with water, with fire, with armies, with blood. Not because humanity was perfect, but because it was His. Because the design was intentional, because every limitation you carry in your mortal body was placed there on purpose by someone who later wore that same mortal body and walked in the dust of Judea to show you that being human was never the problem. So when you read Genesis 6 next time, don't read it as mythology. Don't read it as a curiosity. Read it as what it is. The opening chapter of a war that lasted millennia and that was won by a carpenter from Nazareth who had in his family tree the name of every man and every woman who refused to be anything other than human. From Adam to Noah, from Noah to Abraham, from Abraham to David, from David to Joseph, and from Mary, a teenager in a forgotten village, was born he who crushed the serpent's head. Not with the power of a Nephilim, with the power of a man who was God. And that changes everything. If this video impressed you, click on the video appearing on your screen now. I set it aside for those who reach the end of this one. But I need to be honest with you. Everything I just said, about the seed, about the lineage, about the cross, all of it is true. But it would be intellectual dishonesty on my part to end here. As if this story were only about the past. As if everything ended when Jesus said it is finished on that cross. Because Jesus himself left a warning that most preachers quote without understanding the real weight of the words. Matthew 24 verse 37. The disciples asked, "What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" And Jesus answered with a phrase that should take away the sleep of anyone who just watched everything you watched in this video. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be the coming of the Son of Man. As it was in the days of Noah. Most sermons you've heard on this verse focus on the following part: eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage. And the standard interpretation is that Jesus was talking about distraction. about an alienated humanity, living their routine without realizing that judgment was approaching. And yes, that is part of it. But it is the shallowest part. Because Jesus' audience, first-century Jews, knew the Enochian tradition. They knew the Watchers. They knew the story of genetic corruption. When Jesus said, as in the days of Noah, his listeners did not just think of distracted people eating and drinking. They thought of what caused the flood, the violation of boundaries, the mixture of what should not be mixed, the corruption of the human seed. That was the immediate association. And Jesus, who chose every word with surgical precision, knew exactly what image he was evoking. And now I need you to look around. Not at 2,000 years ago, at now, at the world you live in while you watch this video. We live in the first generation of human history with the technical capacity to edit the genetic code of our own species. CRISPR-Cas9, a tool that allows cutting, removing, and inserting DNA sequences with a precision that would have seemed like magic to any scientist 30 years ago. We have already edited human embryos in the lab. We have already corrected genetic diseases before birth. And the companies at the forefront of this technology do not hide the final goal. They publish it in scientific journals. The goal is human enhancement, not just curing diseases, increasing capabilities, strength, intelligence, longevity, making the human being more than human. And it's not just genetics, brain-computer interfaces, neural chips implanted that connect human thought directly to artificial intelligence systems. Billion-dollar companies working to merge the human mind with the machine. And the discourse, pay attention to the discourse, is always the same. Transcending human limitations, evolving to the next stage, becoming something greater than we are. The direction is different. In Genesis, it was celestial beings who descended to mingle with humans. Now it is humans ascending to mingle with something non-human. The direction has reversed, but the impulse is identical. To cross the border, to erase the line between what is human and what is not, to become hybrid. And the promise, always the same promise since the garden, is that on the other side of that line, there is something better. You shall be like God. 5 words, the original lie, still working. I am not against science. I am not against medicine. Curing a genetic disease in a child is an act of compassion that honors the God who made us. But there's a difference between healing what is broken and redesigning what was created. There is a difference between restoring humanity and replacing it. And that difference, that border, is exactly what the Watchers crossed. They looked at the original design and decided they could improve it. They mixed the celestial with the earthly and produced something that was neither one thing nor the other, the Nephilim. Mighty, yes, famous, yes, but corrupted, violent, destructive, a race that found no peace because it belonged nowhere, neither to heaven nor to earth, and they were destroyed, all of them, because the mixture was not evolution, it was corruption. And modern transhumanism, with all its technological brilliance, with its promises of eternal life, of superhuman intelligence, of fusion with the machine, carries the same fundamental error that the Watchers committed on top of Mount Hermon. The error is not wanting more. The error is thinking that more means ceasing to be what you are, that being human is a limitation to be overcome instead of a design to be honored. The entire Bible screams the opposite. God did not become a machine. He did not become an angel. He did not merge with artificial intelligence. He became flesh, human flesh. Born of a woman, he cried, he bled, he died. The creator of the universe looked at all possible forms of existence and chose to become exactly what the world today tells us is not enough: human. And I think that is the deepest lesson the story of the Nephilim has to offer. It is not a lesson about giants or about fallen angels or about ancient genetic conspiracies. It is a lesson about value, about what humanity means to God. Think of the scale of what he did to protect it. He drowned a planet. He guided a people through the desert for 40 years. He toppled the walls of entire cities. He raised up judges, kings, and prophets generation after generation. He sent his son to be born in a manger in an insignificant village on the periphery of the Roman Empire. Everything, every flood, every battle, every meticulous genealogy, every fulfilled prophecy, everything was to preserve one thing, the pure human seed, intact, without mixture, without contamination, without corruption, because it was from that seed that the rescue would come. The Nephilim were impressive. They were giants. They were famous. The Hebrew text calls them Gibborim, mighty ones, men of renown. The ancient world admired them. They built cities. They dominated peoples. Their names were remembered for centuries, but they vanished, all of them. No lineage remained, no civilization remained, no permanent legacy remained. Meanwhile, Noah, a simple man, righteous, Tamim in his generations, no one special in the eyes of the ancient world, Noah survived. And from Noah came Shem, and from Shem came Abraham, and from Abraham came David, and from David came Jesus. The lineage of the simple, the pure, those who remained human when all the world around was becoming something else. That lineage won. And I need you to understand what that means for your life. You live in a world that will tell you every day that you are not enough, that you need to be faster, more efficient, more connected, more optimized. That being human, with your limitations, your weaknesses, your mortality, is a problem to be solved, a beta version waiting for the ultimate upgrade. And the story of the Nephilim is the oldest and most brutal answer that exists to that lie. Because every time something tried to improve the human project, every time an entity crossed the border and tried to create something beyond the human, the result was destruction, violence, abomination, and God intervened, personally, with water, with fire, with armies, with blood, not because humanity was perfect, but because it was his, because the design was intentional, because every limitation you carry in your mortal body was placed there on purpose by someone who later wore that same mortal body and walked in the dust of Judea to show you that being human was never the problem. So when you read Genesis 6 next time, don't read it as mythology. Don't read it as a curiosity. Read it as what it is, the opening chapter of a war that lasted millennia and that was won by a carpenter from Nazareth who had in his family tree the name of every man and every woman who refused to be anything other than human. From Adam to Noah, from Noah to Abraham, from Abraham to David, from David to Joseph, and from Mary, a teenager in a forgotten village, was born he who crushed the serpent's head, not with the power of a Nephilim, with the power of a man who was God. And that changes everything. If this video impressed you, click on the video appearing on your screen now. I set it aside for those who reach the end of this one.